what is the purpose of this war? It seems to be, does he want the oil? Does he want to stop it? We don't know what he wants.
This is about regime change. That has never really worked well for us, whether it's South Vietnam or Cuba or Iraq or Afghanistan.
The president is committed to stopping the illegal flow of drugs into our country. He's also fully committed to effectuating this administration's sanction policy, and that's what you saw and the world saw take place yesterday.
Well, Venezuela and what we're doing with our military off the coast of Venezuela is a big focus in Washington. Just minutes ago, the president talked about Venezuela and the drugs coming out of there. We also heard earlier today from the disputed president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro.
One of the things it's about is the fact that they've allowed millions of people to come into our country from their prisons, from gangs, from drug dealers, and from mental institutions, probably proportionately more than anybody else. If you look at the drug traffic by sea is down 92%. And nobody can figure out who the 8% is, because I have no idea.
No more Vietnam! No more Somalia! No more Iraq! No more Afghanistan! No more Libya! No blood for oil!
No blood for oil. Let's bring in our panel, Fox News contributor Mollie Hemingway. Josh Kraushaar is a Fox News radio political analyst, and Leslie Marshall, also a Fox News contributor. Mollie, as far as the goals here, after the seizing of the ship, which was a sanctioned ship of Iranian oil that the U.S. seized and now is controlling, it seems like there may be more of that. But describing what this is, this action, has been interesting to listen to the administration.
Yeah, I believe President Trump is a bit of a throwback president to previous presidents of the country that followed a Monroe Doctrine, a focus on issues in our own hemisphere. President Trump seems to be very concerned about issues in our hemisphere, and Venezuela being a big problem. This seizing of the boat, which was a stateless vessel, claimed to be flying under a Guyana flag, but was actually not registered there. That is, stateless vessels do not have legal protection, and it was carrying Maduro's oil. So it's an aggressive action, but it's an action that makes sense in this Trump framework of caring about Venezuela, its hostility to our country, its state-sponsored drug cartels. But what we heard from Caroline Leavitt today, too, that was interesting was that President Trump is not interested in a boots-on-the-ground regime change war. Some of these actions might be best understood as ways to avoid that type of conflict while applying economic pressure.
You know, speaking of economic pressure, we're really not put all of the pressure, Josh, on Vladimir Putin when it comes to Ukraine. Putin, according to Reuters, reassures Venezuela's Maduro of Moscow's support in a call. That's the Kremlin said in a statement that Vladimir Putin and Maduro had spoken of their desire to act on their strategic partnership agreement and implement various joint projects related to the economy and the energy secretary. So, you know, Putin, again, getting involved in something the U.S. is involved in, too.
Yeah, look, it's important to understand why the United States seized the oil tankers. It's because that oil was going to fund terrorism, fund the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in the Middle East, fund Hezbollah. So there is global implications to the business that Venezuela has been trying to do and has been doing for some time. So there is a global national security interest that I think the Trump administration would be advised to be a little clearer and maybe give an Oval Office address about the mission in Venezuela. There's the element that's designed and trying to protect the seas and trying to protect global security. There's also the drug interdiction part that has also been much discussed. But the president he gave a lot of comments just now about the mission in Venezuela, but perhaps it could be, I think there's a communications challenge, and perhaps it could use an Oval Office address or some more clearer communication on the mission, because I think it is one that is in America's national security interest.
Leslie?
Well, when you have some people, look, you know, I'm certainly no fan of Maduro, and I don't think, you know, there's any American really that is. But when you have him saying, look, this is not about drugs, it's about oil. And even though some people would say, okay, apples and oranges, and you have a vessel that's not carrying drugs, by the way, not going to the Middle East, going to Cuba, and you have it seized, and we're going to take the oil, it makes the enemy look like he's right. It makes it look like what he is accusing us of, which is an act of piracy in international waters. So people can say we have, subpoenas and we have, the paperwork that is required, and this is for, national security and this is for safety. But when it comes down to it, there are a lot of people, not just inside the United States and not just in Venezuela, but worldwide, that are whispering, well, if it's really just about the drugs, then how come we're so concerned about the oil and the way that this is being obtained? And even though, to Molly's point, thankfully there's not a plan to have boots on the ground, that is a concern where this escalates to. Maduro is not the most sane individual.
Molly, I want to take you to the Homeland Security hearing, the hearing about threats that the Homeland Security Secretary attended. This is Benny Johnson and their exchange today. Take a listen.
Just 2 weeks ago, the day before Thanksgiving, a terrorist shot 2 of our National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C.
Madam Secretary, you and the gentleman from NCTC reference the unfortunate accident that occurred with the National Guardsmen being killed.
You think that was an unfortunate accident?
I mean,
It was a terrorist attack.
Wait. Look, I'll get it straight. Then you can
He shot our
respond.
National Guardsmen in the head.
It was kind of heated at times in that hearing, Molly.
Yeah, Benny Thompson was ostensibly the head of the J6 committee, which was purported to take a lot of concern about domestic violence. And yet we've seen from top Democrats, including him and others, a hostility toward police, military, DHS, ICE, the National Guard. And there is a body count associated with this culture of hatred that we've seen grow against these people who are enforcing rule of law. And this is something that should be bipartisan, really.
All right, panel. Thanks so much.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.